Welcome back to our deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a document that many people might just skim over, but it's full of gold if you dig in. An annual report.
That's right. Specifically, we've got the 2024 annual report from Universal Robina Corporation, or URC. And yeah, these reports are the company's official story for the year. The good, the bad, the strategy.
The numbers, of course. Our job today is basically to wade through it, pull out the really key stuff, and figure out, what the big picture was for URC last year, according to them.
And they signal right away, right in the introductory messages, that 2024 wasn't exactly smooth sailing. They paint a picture of a pretty tough global situation.
Okay, so let's start right there then. How did the top brass, the leadership, actually describe the operating environment in 2024?
Well, the chairman's message uses that phrase we hear all the time now, doesn't it? A new normal VUCA environment. Volatile, uncertain.
Yeah, so complex, ambiguous.
Yeah, exactly. And they stressed this wasn't new for 2024. It was a continuation.
So what specific things were making it feel so VUCA for them?
They list a few major ones. Ongoing geopolitical stuff, they actually mention Europe and the Middle East specifically. Then hitting closer to home for their business, big worries about crop supplies.
Linked to weather and climate change, I imagine.
Directly. And that flows right into commodity prices, obviously. The report flags coffee and cocoa hitting multi-decade highs, higher even than the year before, which was already high.
Wow.
And then there's the trade environment. They talk about increasing protectionism, more trade barriers popping up in what they describe as a more sort of multipolar world. They even mention specific tariffs announced just weeks before they wrote the report.
Okay, so you've got geopolitics, climate affecting supply chains, tricky trade dynamics. Quite the cocktail.
Yeah.
What about the president and CEO? Same vibe.
Pretty much echoes it. Confirms they navigated a challenging year, highlights that volatile economy, the supply pressures from crops and climate again, but also mentions shifting consumer behavior because of inflation, people changing how they shop.
Right, belt tightening. So the core message from the top seems to be, look, it was really tough out there, complex challenges, but hey, we managed it.
So, okay, who is URC exactly, for anyone who doesn't know? And where are they actually doing business in this tricky world? The About section and the geographic info kind of lay it out.
Yeah, most people probably know them for snacks and drinks, right?
Yeah.
Branded consumer foods, that seems like a huge part. And they mentioned it includes their packaging side, too.
It's definitely big, but they're more diversified. They've got this large agro-industrial group. They call it AIC. And that covers a lot. Animal feed, animal health, actual farm operations. Even things like food-grade drugs and disinfectants. Quite broad.
Okay.
Plus a flour division. And a sugar and renewables division. So that's sugar milling, distilleries, and even power generation.
And they're not just in the Philippines, are they? The footprint looks massive across Asia. We're talking manufacturing, warehouses, commodity facilities.
Oh, yeah. Huge. In the Philippines alone, they list, 46 different facilities across those segments, but internationally, very extensive. They list facilities in Hong Kong, 6 in China.
Wow, 6 in China.
1 each in Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia. Then 6 in Thailand, 4 in Vietnam, 3 in Malaysia, 1 in Singapore, and 2 in Indonesia. Plus, they mention having separate sales and distribution setups in 5 other locations, too.
So, yeah, definitely a major regional player with deep Filipino roots, but really diverse operations across Southeast Asia and beyond.
Okay, shifting from just the operations map, a really significant portion of this report, a lot of pages, are dedicated to sustainability and responsibility. And it doesn't feel like just lip service. They've got these icons linking activities back to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, I saw those, like zero hunger, good health, responsible consumption. It shows they're trying to frame their efforts in that bigger global picture.
Exactly. And one specific area they detail is product wellness. They've actually developed their own system, the URC Wellness Score, with specific criteria.
Right, and they actually measure their products against it. What did the 2024 results show?
It shows progress. 100% of their products met at least one criterion, which is, a start. 99% met 2, and 87% met 3. Then it drops off a bit, 40% passed 4, and only 7% hit all 5 criteria.
Okay, so room to grow there.
For sure, but they have a stated goal for 2030.
Yeah.
Get 100% of their products meeting at least 3 of those wellness criteria.
Yeah.
And they give examples of how they're trying, like a breading mix with veggies baked in, or using natural ingredients in products in other countries.
And it's not just about what's in the product, right? They talk about the environmental side too.
Yeah, packaging is a big one. They mention things like reducing the amount of plastic trim wasted in manufacturing, making some products stick shorter, using thinner shrink wrap on their C2 drinks. Seemingly small things, but at their scale.
Adds up quickly.
Exactly. And energy is clearly a focus, especially given they have that renewables division.
Right. What are they doing there?
Well, a key example is their biomass plant at the Cabancalan sugar mill. It burns bagasse, that's the fiber left after crushing sugarcane to generate power, so less fossil fuel use, and they say they even export surplus power to the grid sometimes.
That's interesting.
Plus, they're buying renewable electricity, solar and geothermal in the Philippines, and have specific solar power agreements, PPAs, in Vietnam, too.
Water's another big environmental metric these days.
Yep, and they report a pretty substantial reduction in their water use ratio for 2024, about 38% less water per unit of output compared to their 2020 baseline.
Okay. And connecting back to those climate worries the bosses mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
how does the report say they're managing climate risk?
They break it down. They talk about acute risks, like sudden events like typhoons and floods, and chronic risks like rising average temperatures and heat stress. And for each type, they list preventative actions. Things like business continuity plans, upgrading facilities to be more resilient, having backup power, better drainage, emergency plans, staff training. It's about trying to prepare for those impacts.
Makes sense. And for a food company, feed waste must be a major consideration.
Huge. They detail a partnership they have with an organization called Scholars of Sustenance Philippines, SOSPH. The focus is rescuing surplus food that's still good but might otherwise be wasted and getting it to communities in need. It includes collecting food, but also supporting rescue kitchens.
Good stuff. And are they getting any recognition for all this environmental work?
Seems so. The report mentions winning something called the Green Excellence in Environment Award, and they list specific plants that won awards within the company for things like energy efficiency in Vietnam, waste management in Thailand, water management in Pampanga. So it suggests these initiatives are actually happening at the plant level.
All right, let's pivot a bit. Let's look under the hood at the company's structure, corporate governance, and how they deal with stakeholders.
Right. This section is all about the framework, the rules, the systems, the processes that guide how the board and the management run the company and answer to stakeholders. They mention having a revised corporate governance manual, so they're actively working on this.
And what are the main principles they say they're focused on for good governance?
Things like having a competent board, making sure strategy is aligned across the company, robust risk management, we just talked about climate risk, for example, promoting ethics and integrity, ensuring accountability, and having clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Pretty standard pillars, but important.
And how does this translate to dealing with, say, customers or suppliers?
For customers, they state they have policies and procedures and make contact info readily available for concerns or complaints. For suppliers and contractors, there's a supplier accreditation policy, basically, vetting them to make sure they're qualified and meet URC standards. They also say they orient suppliers on their policies, including ethical practices.
What about your own employees? How do they approach development?
They highlight a specific platform, the John Go Conway Institute for Leadership and Enterprise Development, or JGILE. Sounds like their internal university, essentially. It provides systematic training focusing on things like personal mastery, servant leadership, collaboration, operational skills, basically investing in their people's capabilities.
Governance always involves tackling corruption risk. How do they address that?
They really emphasize a commitment to transparency and fairness. They list specific policies, a code of business conduct and ethics, rules on conflict of interest, disciplinary actions for offenses. And they say this isn't just on paper, it's embedded through regular training and e-module employees have to take, constant reminders, and even an annual self-disclosure where employees have to declare any potential conflicts.
Okay, pretty comprehensive. What if an employee does see something unethical? Is there a channel?
Yes. They describe their whistleblowing system called UVoice. It's presented as a secure, confidential platform where employees or even external stakeholders can raise concerns. Importantly, they promise no retaliation and say there's access to an independent board member or unit if the reporter prefers.
That non-retaliation piece is key, isn't it?
Absolutely crucial for any whistleblowing system to be effective. They also touch on just general compliance,
Yeah.
following all the relevant laws and regulations, things like respecting trade secrets, proper use of company funds and assets, and importantly, complying with labor laws. They specifically call out meeting the minimum benefits under the Philippine retirement pay law. And they state there were 0 legal actions or formal grievances related to forced or child labor in 2024.
Good to see that explicitly stated. And finally, the report lists the actual people in charge.
Yep, it gives a slate of elected directors and key officers for 2024 chairman, president, and CEO, and the main C-suite roles. Interestingly, it also notes some specific officer role changes that took effect just after the reporting period in early 2025. New titles or shifted responsibilities for the CFO, CTO, and a combined chief supply chain and sustainability officer role. So a bit of evolution there at the top.
Okay, let's get into the perhaps drier but still crucial part, the financials and specific transactions mentioned in the report. What stood out?
Well, one thing that's pretty clear and relevant for investors is the dividend policy. The report confirms they paid out cash dividends twice during the year based on 2023 earnings. It was P1.90E per share each time. Approved in March and August, paid out in May and September 2024, so tangible cash back to shareholders.
That's straightforward enough. The report also talks about judgments and estimates in financial reporting. What's that really mean for us reading it?
It's basically the company acknowledging that accounting isn't always black and white. They have to make informed judgments based on accounting standards, like PFRS 15 for revenue. This involves estimating things like how likely are they to collect all the money they're owed, or has an asset lost value perhaps due to rising interest rates or underperformance, or exactly when should they book revenue. It's a reminder that there's some estimation involved in the numbers.
Right, it's not just pure math. That's a weird term. Biological assets. What's that about?
Yeah, that relates to their agro-industrial business, specifically the poultry side. Breeder chickens, chicks. These are living assets. Accounting rules require them to be valued at fair value, less cost to sell. So they estimate what they're worth based on market prices, but adjust for things like the age and breed of the birds. It's a specific accounting need for things that, well, grow and change.
Okay, makes sense. How about recognizing revenue for their big commodities, like sugar? Is that complex?
There are specific triggers. For raw sugar, it's often tied to the transfer of official warehouse receipts called quedons, or when it ships. For refined sugar and alcohol, it's usually upon shipment or delivery. Molasses might be when certificates are surrendered or it's delivered and accepted. It's all about pinpointing when the control and the risk really passes to the buyer according to the contracts and regulations.
And they work with sugarcane farmers, right? How does that arrangement work financially?
Yeah, it's a milling contract system. The report mentions a typical split. The planters, the farmers, get maybe 60–70% of the sugar and molasses produced from their cane. And URC, as the miller processing it, gets the remaining 30–40%. They also note a law, the Sugar Industry Development Act, gives farmers some flexibility in how they get paid.
Got it. The report also briefly mentions foreign currency.
Standard stuff, really. Just outlining their policy for translating foreign currency transactions and balances into Philippine pesos for their main reports, and how they account for exchange rate gains or losses.
And then there's talk of non-controlling interests in equity reserves. Can you decode that?
Sure. Non-controlling interest, or NCI, happens when URC owns a majority stake in another company, say 70% but not 100%. The other 30% is the NCI. URC still controls the company and includes all its results in their financials, but they have to show the portion of profit and equity that belongs to those outside owners.
Okay.
The report mentions a specific NCI example, 49% in NURC, so URC owns 51%. Equity reserves can change when URC's ownership percentage changes. For instance, if they buy more shares from the NCI holders.
And did they give an example of that happening?
Yes, they did. In October 2023, they bought a small additional stake in URC Malaysia from the NCI holders there. It cost about P0.4 million and bumped their ownership up from 91.5% to 95.6%. This transaction led to a P15.7 million charge against their equity reserves. It's an accounting entry reflecting that shift in the ownership structure between URC and the minority owners.
Interesting accounting. Any other major transactions called out?
A couple stood out. They bought sugar milling equipment and machinery from another company, KDPI, in June 2023 for nearly P900 million. That's a significant investment in their sugar operations.
Definitely.
And they continued to invest in their Vietnam subsidiary, VURCI. They put in P75 million more capital in April 2023 and another P170 million in March 2024. Shows ongoing commitment to that market.
And they mentioned that joint venture with Danone.
Right, DURBI. Formed way back in 2014, specifically for the blue drink brand here in the Philippines. Just a reminder of that partnership.
Anything else notable towards the end of the report?
They include their track record of securities registered with the SEC, kind of a compliance check, and one very specific operational note. They state that no commercial operations started at their Saria facility during 2024, just a factual update on that specific site.
Wow. Okay. We really covered a lot of ground there, pulling apart that URC annual report. We started with how leadership saw this really challenging VUCA world in 2024, geopolitics, climate, commodities.
Yeah, then we mapped out their actual physical presence across Asia and the surprising diversity of their business, way beyond just snacks. You've got the agro-industrial side, sugar, renewables.
And we spent a good chunk on their sustainability and responsibility push. I mean, the detail was pretty impressive. Product wellness scores, packaging reduction, the biomass energy, water savings, climate risk planning, food rescue.
Definitely a major focus. We also looked at the governance structure, the rules of the road for the board and management, how they handle ethics, supplier relations, employee development, the whistleblowing system, compliance, kind of the scaffolding holding it all together.
And finally, we dipped into the financials. Dividends paid, how they value those biological assets, recognizing revenue from commodities, and some specific big-ticket investments and ownership adjustments.
It really shows how one document, even a dense one like an annual report, gives you this multi-layered view of a huge company. You see the strategy meeting the reality, the external pressures, the internal processes, the financial outcomes, all interconnected.
So thinking about everything we just unpacked from URC's 2024, all the sustainability efforts, governance checks, navigating that global volatility while running the core business, the financial transactions. If you had to pick one thing, what do you think is the single most critical factor for a complex company like URC to really nail for success in the next few years, given everything we've heard?